I should have known something was wrong as soon as I woke up and noticed an unusual silence outside. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was a winch stopped right in my driveway. Next to it were two men in generic uniforms, the kind that any HOA loves to give to its volunteers to make them feel like officers of the law. The HOA officers were there, ready to take my car. It took me a second to process the level of ridiculousness of the scene. There was my car, parked exactly where it had been since I bought the house. My garage, my property, all completely legal. But that didn't stop those two clowns from trying to play sheriff. One of them was holding a notepad, probably pretending to be filling in a super important report, while the other was talking on the radio as if he were coordinating a high-risk operation. All that was happening was an attempted robbery, disguised as an inspection. I made a point of not saying anything right away. Firstly, because I wanted to see how far this insanity would go. Secondly, because I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves. It was only when one of them started attaching the hooks to my car that I decided to act. Nice job, huh? The guy holding the notepad turned to me in surprise. Then he regained his pose of fake authority and snorted. This is an official HOA action. Your vehicle is in violation of the parking regulations. Ah, so now I was a dangerous criminal. I crossed my arms, feeling that this was going to be fun. Violations of the regulations? What would those violations be? The man opened his notepad and pointed to a piece of paper full of fine print and bureaucracy. According to Section 14, Paragraph 7, Line 3, it is not permitted to park private vehicles in residential areas for more than 48 consecutive hours without significant movement. I blinked a few times, trying to understand if he really believed the crap he was saying. So you decided to tow my car because it was parked in my own garage? The man nodded, as if he had just quoted an article from the Constitution. That's the rule, sir. The HOA takes these infractions very seriously. It was at that moment that I realized they had no idea who I was. They didn't know that they were trying to confiscate the car of the city's chief of police. And, my God, how funny that was going to be. But, for now, I wanted to see how far they'd take this clowning. And what's the fine for this major infraction? The second guy, who until now had only been pretending to talk on the radio, finally decided to get involved. $150. I held in my laughter. So, you're telling me that you're going to tow away an $80,000 car for a $150 fine? The first man seemed to hesitate for a second, as if his brain was processing the illogicality of the situation. But then he pulled himself together. The rules have to be followed. Oh, of course. The rules. The same rules that nobody follows, except when the HOA wants them to. Meanwhile, some neighbors began to appear, curious about the scene. I saw an elderly couple whispering, a woman holding her cell phone, probably recording, and even the neighbor's dog sitting on the sidewalk, looking like he knew someone was going to get screwed. The question was, how far would they go before they realized they were about to make a huge mistake? And the answer came quickly. The tow truck started the engine. They really were going to take my car. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to end the show. It's okay. Just give me a second. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed a number I knew very well. On the other end of the line, one of my sergeants answered. "Captain, I need a car at my address. My car seems to have been stolen." The silence on the other end was quick, followed by a serious tone. "I'm sending a unit now." I hung up the phone and looked at the two imbeciles who were still trying to pretend they had some authority. "Quick warning to you two. I'm the chief of police of this city, and in a few minutes, a car will be here. Then we'll see who's really breaking the law." Their expression of confidence evaporated instantly. The silence that followed was so delicious that I almost felt bad for them. Almost. They looked at each other, clearly beginning to panic. What had once been a glorified HOA police operation was now turning into a situation in which the real police themselves were about to intervene. What about me? Well, I just pulled into my garage and waited, because this was far from over. If there's one thing I've learned over the years in the police department, it's that some people just don't know when to stop. They believe in their own false authority so much that they keep digging the hole even when they're already up to their necks in it. And, my friend, the HOA officers had their shovels in their hands and were digging like crazy. After I informed them that a car was on its way, the two guys exchanged nervous glances. The one holding the notebook looked at the tow truck driver and made a discreet gesture, as if to say, "Turn it off now." But the other, the one who until then had been pretending to talk on the radio, still didn't understand the size of the shit he was getting himself into. "We can't let him intimidate the HOA," he declared, raising his chest as if he were defending the rights of the Constitution. I stopped for a second, just to appreciate the level of idiocy. The neighbors, who were just watching before, were now starting to laugh. You could see a couple recording the scene, probably already imagining that it would end up in some viral video on Facebook with the title, "The HOA has finally lost its mind." But the best was yet to come. The siren sounded in the distance. The two men paled instantly. The winch turned off its engine immediately. Now they were beginning to realize that they weren't just messing with some random neighbor. The car stopped right in front of my house, and two of my officers got out of the car. They weren't rushing or alarmed, because, of course, they knew exactly what was going on. I gave a slight nod to one of the officers, who smiled. He knew it was going to be quite a show. The officer stepped forward, looked at the two men from the HOA, and asked, "Can someone explain to me why there's a tow truck trying to take away the city police chief's car?" And that was that. That was the end of the plastic courage of those two clowns. The one holding the notebook stammered violently, flipping through the pages as if he were suddenly going to find a secret article that would allow him to tow a law enforcement officer's car on his own property. The other, who had previously been speaking thickly, fell completely silent, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it so easily. "Please explain the situation," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm curious." The first man snorted and tried to regain his poise. "The HOA has very clear regulations." The policeman raised his hand, interrupting. "Right. And you're both policemen?" Quiet. "Do you have any authority to impound vehicles?" More silence. "Do you have a removal order issued by a court?" By now the silence was almost deafening. The policeman then took out a small notepad and continued. "Because, as far as I know, removing a private vehicle without legal authorization amounts to attempted theft." Both men's eyes widened. Now they were really scared. But I wanted a bit more. I'm also curious to know what the HOA board thinks about this. I turned to the neighbors. "Can anyone tell me if this ridiculous operation was approved by the board?" The couple filming laughed. "We haven't heard anything. As far as I know, this fine isn't even official." Another neighbor added. The policeman smiled and wrote down a few more things. "Got it. So what we have here is an attempt to illegally remove a vehicle without the owner's authorization, without a court order, and without the knowledge of the official HOA administration." He closed the notepad and looked directly at the two men. "Do you want me to continue, or have you realized that you're in deep shit?" If I'd had a camera at that moment, I would have captured a perfect portrait of absolute defeat. The man with the notepad began to sweat. The other couldn't even look straight ahead. That's when the policeman threw the icing on the cake. "Which one of you is Karen?" It was as if someone had thrown a grenade in there. Even the neighbors started laughing. By now, it was obvious that the great leader behind this tomfoolery wasn't there in person, probably waiting for her henchmen to sort it all out themselves. But now that the real police were involved, I was sure they'd show up in no time. And she didn't. "What's going on here?" The shrill voice came from behind the group, and when I turned to look, there she was, the president of the HOA, the woman who thought she ran the entire condominium, marching in like a medieval queen arriving on the battlefield. And the best part? She had no idea what awaited her. If the HOA cops were already drowning in their own stupidity, now the captain of the ship was coming to sink them for good. Karen came marching down the sidewalk with the fury of a dictator on the verge of a coup d'etat, her short hair in disarray, her cheeks red with rage, and a notebook of fines clenched so tightly that it looked like it was about to explode. I knew this was going to be good. "Can someone explain to me why there's a car here?" she fired, not even realizing that the whole scene was already out of her control. The two HOA cops, once full of confidence, now looked like children who had broken the school window and knew they were going to get screwed. Neither of them answered. Then she looked at me. "What did you do?" I smiled. "Oh, nothing much. I just called the police because 2 people tried to steal my car in front of everyone." Karen blinked a few times. "Steal? That's standard HOA procedure." The officer with me raised an eyebrow. "Ah, so you're the one who authorized this removal?" Karen hesitated. She realized she was being cornered. "Well, the HOA has authority over the rules of the condominium then." "Actually, it doesn't." The officer cut her off, flipping through his own notepad. "So far, we haven't found any evidence that you have the right to tow cars without formal authorization, let alone inside someone's garage." The silence was awkward. Even the neighbors were trying to hold in their laughter. But Karen wasn't going to give up without trying some ridiculous card. "This man has broken the rules." I crossed my arms, expecting the joke. What rules would those be? She quickly opened her notebook, flipped through the pages, and found that regulation those 2 clowns had mentioned before. Section 14, paragraph 7, line 3, clearly states that private vehicles may not remain parked without significant movement for more than 48 consecutive hours. I let out a short laugh. "So, to clarify, you think you can take a car out of a resident's garage because he hasn't driven for 2 days? That's an official regulation." The policeman sighed, out of patience. "Okay, so do you have records to prove that this car hasn't been moved for more than 48 hours? Karen opened her mouth to answer. Then she closed it. Then she opened it again and closed it again. Because, of course, they had absolutely nothing. Now, all the neighbors were watching her defeat, as if they were in the front row of a comedy show. But I wasn't finished yet. "By the way, do you know whose car this is?" Karen snorted. "Yours, obviously." I nodded slowly. "And do you know who I am?" The silence on her face was priceless. She tried to keep her posture, but you could see that her brain was going haywire. I know you're a resident." The policeman smiled. "Ah, so no one told you that he's also the city's chief of police?" And that's when I saw all the color disappear from her face. Karen froze. Her eyes blinked rapidly, as if she was trying to calculate the consequences and realizing that she had made the worst mistake of her life. The policeman continued. "Now, just for fun. Because, in this case, trying to remove his vehicle without permission is a crime. And if it's proven that it was intentional, we're talking about abuse of power and misappropriation." Karen started to sweat. "Wait, come on. Let's think about this calmly." The policeman raised an eyebrow. "Of course. Let's think about it together." He looked at me. "Do you want to file a formal complaint?" All eyes were on me. Even Karen seemed to be holding her breath, and I wanted to make the most of this moment. I crossed my arms and nodded slightly, pretending to consider. Then I sighed dramatically. "Well, I could sue the HOA for that, but I think there's a simpler way to solve it." Karen seemed to see a light at the end of the tunnel. "Great, we can find a reasonable solution." But I was ready for the final blow. "I just want this absurd $150 fine to be officially revoked. And for you, Karen, to send an email to all the residents explaining that the HOA made a mistake." The horror in her eyes was better than any revenge. She hesitated. She tried to think of some way to escape the humiliation, but there was no way out. Either I did this, or I sued the HOA until there wasn't even a "no stepping on grass" sign left. The woman had no choice. "Okay," she mumbled, almost spitting out the words. "What?" I asked, pretending not to have heard. She gritted her teeth. "All right, let's cancel the fine and I'll send the email." The neighbors started applauding. The couple recording almost choked with laughter. Even the policeman smiled. "Great decision, Karen. Now, I suggest you release the tow truck before someone decides to sue you for obstruction of private property." The two HOA cops unhooked my car at lightning speed. Karen stormed out, probably already planning her revenge. But you know what? I've been waiting for this. Because people like her never know when to give up. If you think Karen accepted defeat with dignity and got on with her life, you clearly don't know the kind of person who gets into the HOA to run other people's lives. Because she tried to give back. And, my friend, that's where she dug her own grave. The public humiliation of the last meeting had dealt her a heavy blow. The email the HOA sent canceling my fine and admitting the mistake spread through the condo like wildfire. And now everyone knew that the great leader had been defeated. But, of course, she wasn't going to let it go. 3 days after the tow truck incident, I received a new notice from the HOA. And when I say new notice, I mean the most ridiculous and desperate attack I've ever seen. The envelope read as follows: "Dear resident, you are being notified of a public nuisance due to an improper event that occurred on your property that resulted in an uncomfortable situation for other residents. The HOA assesses this incident as a violation of the rules of conduct, and you will be required to attend a disciplinary hearing." I read it 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. She wanted to fine me for calling the police when they tried to steal my car. It was so absurd that I just started laughing. But do you know what my real reaction was? I went to the meeting. Yes, I made a point of showing up, because if Karen wanted a show, then I was going to put on a show. This time, the meeting was packed. After the hoist mess, almost all the residents of the condominium decided to show up, probably to see how far this insanity would go. Karen was there, sitting at the center of the table like a queen about to issue a decree. But, for the first time, she didn't look so confident. Perhaps because she knew it was ridiculous. Maybe because she realized that no one respected her authority anymore. But still, she tried. "Sir, you have been summoned here to discuss your recent violation of the rules of coexistence." I crossed my arms. "What violation would that be?" She snorted. "You caused an uproar in the condominium by involving the police in a matter that could have been resolved internally." I had to hold back my laughter. "Wait a minute. Are you telling me that when you tried to steal my car, I should have dealt with it internally?" The neighbors were already laughing. But Karen doubled down. "The HOA has its rules and procedures, and we must ensure that there is no abuse of authority." That was the last straw. She was accusing me of abuse of authority after trying to steal my car? I leaned against the table, looking her right in the eye. "Well, Karen, if you want to talk about abuse of authority, maybe we should discuss the fact that not only did you send your goons to try to confiscate my property, but you also used the HOA as an excuse to get rid of anyone you don't like." The room fell silent. Karen swallowed, because now I had everyone's attention. I continued, "Has anyone here ever received a fine from the HOA for something ridiculous?" A man raised his hand. "I got one for leaving my garbage can out 5 minutes longer than allowed." Another woman spoke up. "I was fined because my grass was 2 centimeters over the limit." And then more and more residents began to speak up. "I was fined because my curtain was beige and not white. She had my garden uprooted because she said it didn't fit in with the neighborhood. I got a warning because my children were playing too loudly in the pool." And so it went. Suddenly, everyone realized what was really going on there. Karen wasn't trying to manage anything. She was just controlling everyone for the sheer fun of it. She tried to intervene. The HOA exists to maintain community standards, but it was too late. One of the residents stood up and pointed at the table. "So why aren't the HOA's financial records available for viewing?" Silence. Another resident spoke up. "Yes. Why have our fees increased out of the blue in the last year, but there have been no improvements to the condominium?" More silence. Karen started to sweat, because now it wasn't just about me. It was about her having spent years abusing the power of the HOA for her own benefit. It was then that a neighbor asked the fatal question, "Can you show the financial records now?" And Karen froze. She looked around, tried to mumble some excuse, but couldn't. She knew there was no escape. The HOA was over, and Karen knew it. In the weeks that followed, an investigation was opened. Residents demanded transparency in the HOA's accounts, and guess what? There were thousands of dollars missing. Karen tried to run away from the issue, but the evidence was overwhelming. Not only did she lose her job, she had to answer to the courts. And, ironically, the very police she tried to intimidate were the ones who followed the whole process. After everything was settled, the condominium decided that it would never have an HOA again. The residents organized a small assembly to set new guidelines, but this time without idiotic bureaucracy. And you know what happened? The place didn't turn into chaos. The houses remained beautiful. The lawns were still mowed. But above all, no one was forced to follow absurd rules just because a woman wanted to feel powerful. And what about me? Well, my car is still in my garage, and every time I look at it, I remember nothing like seeing a dictator fall. Don't forget to leave a like and comment on what you thought of the video.